Hey, Soul Center. I'm back with my week 3 update. Again, I've had an amazing week. I've basically, for the whole week, been working with the guides and the trackers. So I've been doing pretty much 2 game drives a day for the last week, and yeah, it's been absolutely incredible. Sitting shotgun, learning the behind the scenes of being a guide, having some incredible sightings, learning animals' behavior, and really learning what it takes to be a guide in such a high pressure environment as a prestigious safari lodge. There's just so many different elements that go into it, and how to craft a proper guest experience without overwhelming both the guests and the animals, and staying clear of the other vehicles on the property. Game drives are a massive piece to safari lodges, and it's just been really cool to see how it runs behind the scenes, and what it takes to really become a guide, and how much you need to know, and how many qualifications you need to get to be at the top of the top and those are the guys that I've been working with. They're some of the best guides on the continent, and yeah, I can't imagine a better place to be working than here. Um, so yeah, outside of game drives, I've been doing a lot of walks as well with the Rangers during the afternoon or late morning once game drive time is over. So I've been going out into the reserve with a guide and a tracker, and really learning how to track animals, recognize prints, learn their behaviors, and learn the very simplified version of what takes guides 10, 15 years to master. So yeah, that's been really cool, and we've had a few encounters with elephants, buffalo, and recently lions on foot, which was amazing. Um, and yeah, so that's I'm learning the ecological side of things at the moment, and it's just I've loved it. That was the main reason for wanting to come back here, and I'm so happy that I can be doing it right now. And so towards my research, I've also been interviewing most of the guides and the trackers on how they play a role in anti-poaching on the reserve, and it really goes into um, it really goes into registering all the sightings of rhino, recognizing different behaviors. If anything seems like it's out of place or fishy, then reporting that to the anti-poaching unit, and also being careful and due diligent when talking to guests, and disclosing figures of rhino on the reserve. It's a very confidential matter, and the guides play a large part in conserving information, and protecting their reserve and protecting the rhinos. The reserve that I'm on, Thorny Bush Game Reserve, is it's private, but it's open to the Kruger National Park. So one of its boundaries, the fence is down, and so animals can come and go, and it's basically an open system, and that's the majority of private reserves in this area, in the greater Kruger, where they all have their separate boundaries and their separate traversing rights and their separate fences, but their eastern boundaries most always open to the greater Kruger, or to the Kruger National Park, and so that allows for biodiversity to come in and out, and it's not a farming zoo environment where you've fenced these animals in, which is great. And so yeah, while interviewing the Rangers, I've also kind of posed the question of rhino horn legalization, and from what I've heard, most of the Rangers talked a lot about how it would help the reserve. That was pretty much the overwhelming opinion of all of the guides that I talked to. Legalization seemed like the answer to a lack of funding and lack of security in private reserves. And so that was really interesting, because this topic is super polarizing. You're either kind of on one side or the other, from what I've seen. And as it being as controversial as it was great to hear some experts talk about it, and learn about their experiences, because they've been working in this place for so long, seeing the animals, and they've really they've really seen the ebbs and flows of poaching, of rhino poaching, throughout the past 10, 15 years in the greater Kruger area. Fortunately, Thorny Bush hasn't had any incursions or incidences in the last like 3, 4 years, so it's on the uptrend. But there are so many reserves that are still getting smashed by poachers, and it's so unfortunate that it's still an issue. And so in kind of talking about legalization, I learned a lot about how the money from the horns can be reinvested into biodiversity measures, not only saving rhino and increasing security, but also being able to buy other species to put them into your reserve, and increase the biodiversity and hopefully rehabilitate some other endangered species like different types of antelope, sable, smaller cat species, etc. Most of them have been driven to poaching driven to extinction over the years, and if these reserves have money to invest back into conservation, then they can hopefully increase the numbers of the species and kind of just increase biodiversity as a whole, because that's always the goal of conservation. And I also learned a lot about conservation versus preservation. In the Western world, we see conservation a lot as a preservation, I would say, and it's just like, especially when you look at rhino horn and the poaching from an outsider's perspective, you're seeing, okay, what are the ways that we can preserve the species and have it always be the same? And they'll always have their horns. They're in free range areas. And yes, that's been the last hundreds of thousands of years, but now the world is changing and we need to adapt to that. And in order to keep the rhinos alive, unfortunately, dehorning is pretty much the only measure that has been deemed effective. So that's where conservation really comes in, where the difference between conservation and preservation is that you're not preserving a species like a mummy. You're not covering it in wax to keep it exactly the same. You're utilizing the tools we have now and the resources we have now to be able to protect the species and increase diversity, increase diversity, increase rehabilitation, and yeah, it's a massive difference. It's about how we can further coexist in this environment, and not only eliminate our print, but also increase the quality of life of these animals as well. So it's all about living harmoniously and doing it together. And so, yeah, that's been super interesting. And then also in the greater Kruger area, there were about 2,000-ish rhinos dropped off recently. It's actually a super interesting story. There was a guy, entrepreneur, I don't remember where he was from, but he bought a huge farm in South Africa and just started stockpiling rhinos. And he was farming the rhino horn in an attempt, because he believed that legalization was soon to come. And he was pouring money into this. It costs an exorbitant amount of money to feed and house 2,000 rhinos for years. So he went bankrupt, long story short. And so then Africa Parks bought back most of the rhinos, and now they're releasing them within the greater Kruger area. So that's been super interesting to see, and seeing the new rhinos on the reserve and seeing how they've adapted and are staying together or separating and going their own ways and figuring out which territories are theirs, etc., etc. So it's super interesting time on the reserve and in the greater Kruger area. And yeah, it's great to see rhinos being rehabilitated into the wild and increasing rewilding efforts, which is always great and a huge aspect of conservation. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they continue, and hopefully it doesn't bring any negativity to it. Hopefully there are no incidences. There definitely will be casualties, but unfortunately, that's the world we live in. We're hoping that these private reserves have enough of a reputation, enough of a security to be able to protect these rhinos, but in the current state of South Africa, you really can't guarantee much, unfortunately. So yeah, that's been super interesting, and that's just another kind of facet of legalization, where if they do legalize rhino horn trade, then more rhinos in captivity will be able to be rewilded into government or private reserves, and increased security measures should, in theory, protect them from poaching. So yeah, that's most of the stuff I've learned this week, and where my research is heading. I also met some guests who have a lot of connections in the rhino conservation world, so I'm gonna get connected with one of the first experts on rhino conservation in South Africa, which would be amazing. So I'm having like a call with him in a few weeks or so, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And just kind of talking with the rangers, learning what it's like to be a guide, learning the incredibly impressive skill of tracking and learning these animals' behavior, and it really just plays a large role in my whole research. There's so many different pieces to this problem, and to really understand it, you got to learn the full picture. And so this is my first week on the ecological side of things, and next week I'll have a half a week working with the Rangers again, and then I'm actually going on a 4 day, 5 night, sorry, 5 night, no, 4 night, 5 day backpacking trip in another reserve. And so no tents, primitive, bring your own food, digging for water, etc. at another reserve. So I'll let you guys know how that went next week, and hopefully I'll have some good encounters, learn a lot of interesting things. And yeah, that's my week 3 update. Thanks.